Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate a long list of issues that have occurred over the past 24 hours alone, we need to highlight, as we do on a regular basis, that today marks day 509 since the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates committed the atrocities of October 7th of 2023. And today, we had also, among others, a really heart-clenching event, namely the funeral of the Bibas family, Shiri Bibas, her two little boys, Ariel Bibas, a 4-year-old, and Kfir Bibas, a 9-month-old baby, who were murdered in Hamas captivity. And to touch on that initially, let's turn to Central Israel, where we're joined by Colonel in Reserve, Reuven Ben Shalom, who is a cross-cultural strategist among a long list of other positions. And it's a pleasure to have you with us, Colonel. I'd like to ask you to give us 2 cents to really one of the most emotional events that Israel experienced, despite having plenty of those funerals over the course of so many months now.
Well, certainly the Bibas family have turned into a symbol of this massacre. And even though we're in a prolonged war with so many casualties on October 7th itself and after, soldiers and civilians, the Bibas family became a symbol also because of the children, also because of the unique imagery that came out that day. And we're a nation that's trying anyway to grasp what's going on here. We're in a state of shock from the personal level, emotional, up to the strategic level, trying to figure out where we stand, what are the lessons, where we're going. And in a way, what you saw today was the people of Israel coming together in this emotional event. Some arrangement, for instance, calling out to Israelis, go out into the streets with Israeli flags. And the interesting thing is that people did go out and stand and line the streets all the way down south, the whole funeral procession. And for instance, in my town of Modi'in, where the funeral did not go through here, also at a certain time, hundreds of people stood outside with flags. Also, following the media today, you can hear the sentiments of people feeling that in the way this is strengthening us, strengthening our resilience. People feel, I think, that this personal tragedy and the national tragedy, in a way, brings us to a focus of more understanding. I'm not sure it brings us to understanding where we're going. Unfortunately, some of these understandings sometimes can go to the extreme. In recent days, there's more sentiment of understanding, like there's no way we're going to continue and ever allow for this to happen again, which means Hamas can stand, which means this leads to very strong ideas of what to do, but also this understanding that maybe the world understands us. Imagery coming out of Gaza and war are always difficult, usually against Israel, unfortunately, when you're an army fighting guerrilla warfare against terrorists. But images like this, in a way, and this story, and these images, and the Bibas family, since they also entered the hearts of people around the world, in a way, we feel like maybe today the world is with us, just today, to understand a bit of what we're going through. So I think this is a very unique and emotional day. It does have its elements of strength. And remember that resilience is an important component of national security. So I think the personal process we're going through today is very important. But again, tomorrow we're going to wake up to the continued larger picture, larger questions of where we go from here.
Indeed. Well, also joining the discussion is Ori Saschar, the head of the research department at the IDSF, or the Israel Defense and Security Forum, which is known in Israel as Habitchonistim. It's good to see you all. I'd like to immediately ask you specifically about the fact that just a day prior, we had yet another funeral of Oded Lipschitz, an 84-year-old man, one of the founding fathers of Kibbutz Nir Oz, and his wife Yochevet, who was released on day 85 after being 85 days in Hamas captivity, eulogized him during the course of which she said, I was together with you, helping the people on the other side, namely the Palestinians in Gaza. We were promoting peace, and we were doing all those things to try and promote, the interchange of views and trying to live together side by side. And then it exploded in our face. And naturally, he paid the ultimate price. This, of course, sentiment that there is no chance for peace is something that I think we all should resent, because we all aspire for peace. But nonetheless, Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog was there also, and his whole address focused on saying sorry that the state of Israel failed.
Absolutely, and you see how blue a war is really the Israeli people's best blue, and we are sort of standing together and understanding the idea behind the importance of cohesion as part of national security. And despite the best of hope, we don't always find a partner on the other end. Much of the West's current, I would say, security strategy or defense strategy focuses around wishful thinking, unfortunately. And the West is going in, I would say, a more perhaps right wing, perhaps nationalist, but I think above all, a more conservative or a more common sense place where you assess the world as it is, as opposed to what you want it to be. And we learn in the hard way how the Hamas, PIJ, other terrorist groups do not see the world the same way that we do. Do not condone even Oded Lifshitz, who himself, as you said, worked all his life in creating bridges between people, despite against all odds. Or the Bibas family, people I think were outraged around the world, especially because these are children. We are especially sensitive to the Syrian child who was carried out on the beach. This is really, and despite 500,000 other people who were killed, because we are sensitive to children and how they are the innocent victims, what the adults are doing. But really, terror catches all of us in a very volatile and a very, I would say, exposed spot. I would just say that there was this quite astonishing testimony. A mere 2 months after October 7, when Yocheved Lifshitz, is now widow, was released from captivity. And she said how she met Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind behind the attack, head of Hamas in Gaza. And she told him, aren't you ashamed after everything we did for you? We in the kibbutzim in the south. The same testimony was by Betty Lahat, the former commander of the Israeli prison, where Sinwar was in prison before he was released to Gaza. And she said he was absolutely clear-eyed all along. He was happy to take from Israel what he could, mainly a brain surgery and education and language and everything that he took. But it did not undermine for a second his belief, his conviction in what should be done with Israel and the Jewish people. And this is quite astonishing. We are not meeting halfway what Israel and the West want and what Hamas and the terrorists want. This is a sort of a September 11 moment.
Indeed. Well, Colonel Reuven Menchelo, I'd like to ask you particularly, since naturally the Gaza Strip is a very significant issue that Israel still needs to deal with, not only to ensure that the Islamist Hamas will never rule the Gaza Strip, since its core objective is the eradication of the nation state of the Jewish people, namely the state of Israel. But beyond that, the prospects for reaching a certain outline to reach an arrangement that would, on the one hand, agree to this, and on the other hand, also agree to Hamas's demand to end the war, and then bring about the release of all hostages, all of this seems to be very complex and very sensitive at this point in time. Negotiations are about to start in Egypt for this purpose specifically, but are you optimistic?
It's hard to say optimistic. It's like the question in Israel about victory. A lot is discussed about striving towards victory or total victory, and many Israelis will tell you that on October 7th we lost, and nothing is ever going to bring us to victory. Of course, we still want to achieve our goals, but when you say optimistic here, certainly I don't think that in our immediate future we're going to see something resolved that we're all happy with. The situation is horrible as it is, fighting against an enemy that they're waging jihad against us. They want us dead. Unfortunately, the realization is sinking in more and more, and more Israelis believe this, that it's not just Hamas, that even tomorrow a bunch of its leaders get on a ship and leave, which I don't think they'll do. So finally, we'll have peace because the Palestinian people will be out of Hamas's clutches. It's a bit more complicated and tragic than that. We have an entire generation that was brainwashed there. I want to be very careful because I am critical towards some of my Israeli friends that take this to an extreme of saying there are no innocents in Gaza. Of course, there are innocents in Gaza. Babies are innocent. And we fight according to the rules of armed conflict, and we have our morals and our values, and we will continue to fight according to them. But we do have to understand that we're fighting an entity that was elected by their people, still supported by their people. There were people standing out and rallying. People brought their children. They were clapping and waving and smiling and laughing as they were trading back the bodies of babies that Hamas murdered with their bare hands. So this is much more complex than this. The big debate in Israel now is, just to clarify this, is are we going to go back to war right now because we must destroy Hamas, or is the main objective bringing back the hostages? The way I understand it, most Israelis want the hostages back now. And it's an understanding that if even one hostage is left there, then this is the strategic failure. We need them back. But it doesn't mean that it's or winning the war or bringing back the hostages. There's no way that Israel can just say, okay, you know what, we want the hostages, we'll give you whatever you want. What happens, by the way, if they say, we'll give you back all the hostages, but you got to move to New Zealand? Well, that's a ridiculous extreme. But what if they say, you end the war, you promise us that you end the war, and we want promises from the mediators, we want guarantees from the Americans and the Qataris that you're never going to attack Gaza again, and you can't fly UAVs over Gaza. What does this mean? They can go right back to building the tunnels, preparing the next October 7th, as they clearly say they plan to do, which means we're not going to enable that. So that's the delicate issue of the government. What I believe they should do is do anything they can to bring back the hostages in any kind of framework. And still, if I interpret their intentions, this government, they do not plan to give in to the goal of eliminating Hamas from Gaza. They will not rule the Gaza Strip, even if it will take us another 5 years of war, and even if we have to dedicate many more resources, and even if I have to go back to serve in the reserves. Many of my fellow Israelis will say the same. We're going to go back, we're going to fight, we're going to do whatever it takes. They're not going to be there. We can take it in the next question to the issue of what is the mechanism? And of course, I think this has to be regional with our partners, the Jordanians, Egyptians, the United Arab Emirates. The mechanism has not been found yet, but we all have to agree that we can't let this brutal regime remain.
Thank you, Colonel. Mr. Yisachar, I'd like to ask you about whether or not this ceasefire is sustainable, considering everything, in the broad sense, but also particularly vis-a-vis the Islamist Hamas, which, again, Israel doesn't want to see it there post the war.
Look, the only way to do it is to implement all of the war objectives. And I agree with my friend here. These are not mutually exclusive goals. Those are complementary goals. The point of Hamas taking hostages is to eternalize the conflict. If we, of course, all Israelis want to see all the hostages back, yet they seek to understand how we prevent the next 2,000 hostages in the next murder, and how we not make it the end of this war and the beginning of the next war. So this is really what is needed to be on the table, the need for Hamas to be off the table. And look, the whole terminology, you asked about ceasefires, the whole terminology of phase A, phase B, is kind of a Biden administration terminology. The Trump administration doesn't quite see it this way. The goal here was to get into the transaction. Once you're inside the transaction, you can make all sorts of adjustments, whether it's prolonging phase A with yet another 42 days in hostage release, as the Israeli government seeks to do right now, whether it is to put some deadlines on Hamas right now to not to violate the ceasefire terms. And so all these things are on the table. This sort of deadline that Trump set for Saturday at 12 may be even may have put the Israeli government under some sort of alert, because we didn't want to risk the ceasefire agreements. But all of this put together shows us that the next war should be avoided, not just this one. And so these things should be on the table. The fact that Hamas can no longer govern Gaza. We'll see everyone from Secretary of State Marco Rubio to Secretary of Defense Mehdi Hexet saying out loud that Hamas must be eliminated and cannot govern Gaza. And you see everyone from pundits to leaders of heads of states are disgusted, absolutely disgusted by these pictures of the Bibas babies and other hostages who are being paraded on the streets like trophies, really senseless and no sensitivity, without sensitivity at all to these very I would say atrocious reality of grief in war. And so ultimately, victory will be fine, same as World War II. Well, it was disastrous. It was huge, a massive cost of life. But eventually, you met the war objectives and you secured peace long term in Europe. So this is really what normally I would expect an Israeli government to do here: eliminate Hamas, safeguard the future of the Gaza Strip, and you choose and of course bring in all hostages, and you choose the mechanism to do this.
Thank you, Mr. Issachar. Colonel Reuven Ben Shalom, I'd like to ask you to focus now on the northern front, talking about Syria. Israel set a red line for the Damascus regime, or the interim regime that is trying still to consolidate its power in Syria, not to establish a military presence south of Damascus, which is roughly 45 kilometers from the border with Israel, the Israeli Golan Heights. And then in that context, ensure that that doesn't happen. It also stressed that there are going to be vigorous responses to any attempt to violate this red line. And lo and behold, the HTS, or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, gave the green light to move some tanks and other armored vehicles south of Damascus, and Israel responded.
Absolutely. I think, well, first, a word of criticism. I think we shouldn't have this system where we find out what our policy is by some comment given in a speech. And then we start, oh, that's our policy, and then interpretations. And then something else is said by a minister. Theoretically, I wish that our policy would be more clear. But anyway, as soon as it came out in one of the speeches, we understood this new red line. In the beginning, like always, we even thought, does he really mean this? And yes, now it's being mentioned. And we've seen, by the way, other cases also with the US administration. This is maybe the new style. Trump says something and then it escalates into something else until you understand what the policy is and it's refined. I think it's a bold move by Prime Minister Netanyahu, perhaps with the backing of the Americans. Understandable from our perspective, because we're very concerned on the stability of that area. It's not like we have a stable country with very clear objectives. It is what it is. This terror organization that is morphing into something that perhaps is going to be a new country, hopefully stable, hopefully with a new vision, hopefully good neighbors, but we have to look out for our interests. The Golan Heights has been for many years one of our most quiet borders. And why? Because we built the right mechanisms, we gave it terminology, we even brought in international forces to monitor it. It was a very delicate mechanism. We're still calling it right now area of separation. Separation between who? Between Israel and the Syrian army. But when the Assad regime toppled, theoretically, we could have said, no reason to call it area of separation. Let's just call it no man's land and we're taking it over. No, we're still using that terminology in a way we're saying we like the mechanism. We like that stability. We want these understandings to continue. All we want is good neighbors on the other side, but a good, secure buffer zone where we know we cannot sustain a surprise attack. Everyone must understand how we feel and how our national security doctrine changed after October 7th. Even though it's not written and maybe not declared, everyone should understand that moving forward, Israel is not going to take chances like in the past. We can't say, oh, it's going to be okay, or it's contained, or they are deterred. Those words, they are deterred, are not to be mentioned in Israel again. If someone dares to say that, oh, my intelligence says they're deterred, he's going to be shut down. Oh, yeah? Was Hamas deterred? That's what the intelligence told us. So I think this is the way to see it in the Golan Heights. Personally, I think maybe you can use a bit more diplomacy. But again, these are the people, these are the mechanisms. Maybe this is the spirit of the time. Maybe I don't know everything. Certainly, it's a bold move from Netanyahu. Naturally, it's going to be answered by rhetoric and actions on the other side that may try to give a stance to test this, and we'll see how this plays out. And again, as I said before, there are the Americans in the picture and other international forces at play. Ultimately, the positive thing here, I think, is that we all want the same thing. I hope we all want the same thing. Most of the players want stability in the Golan Heights and want a quiet border. And I hope that's where it's going to go.
I think it's safe to say that everybody, including the bad actors, wants stability in Syria at this point. Maybe the Iranians don't want that necessarily, but except for them, everybody seeks to somehow bring this devastating war that brought about so many casualties, the loss of life, and quite frankly also the worst refugee crisis since World War II until the Ukraine war erupted when Russia invaded Ukraine. We still need to keep in mind that at this point in time, the Europeans are acting very rash when we're talking about lifting of sanctions, because they are eager to deal with the migrant crisis. They want to see all the Syrians in Europe returned into Syria, and that is something that needs to be taken into account. The Americans, on the other hand, they're somewhat more clear-eyed about the situation, particularly with regard to HTS. An official from another country in the vicinity of Syria, which has also a big stake in Syria, asked me, what do I think about whether or not Trump would support HTS? And I told him, look, first of all, the people around Trump are openly anti-Al-Qaeda, very strong about that, and even the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, came out and said, I don't understand how we can accept Al-Qaeda taking over Damascus. So this is what the president is going to hear. Now, don't forget this same president, President Donald Trump, is a New Yorker, and a New Yorker who was in New York during 9/11. And he remembers full well the atrocities committed by this terror organization, that all the people in this so-called interim government in Damascus were part of Al-Qaeda that fought America in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in other locations post 9/11. So this is something that we need to keep in mind and understand, that I understand there's some wishful thinking in Turkey and that they need the various contracts throughout Syria to rehabilitate their own economy, of course, and rebuild Syria, and that is something that they want. I think they're betting on a losing horse here, and we saw that also in the Conference of National Dialogue just the past couple of days, where you see the people discussing the various things there. No leaders from any of the opposition groups were invited. No political rivals were invited. So where is the national dialogue? We're talking here about just people from the street being called up. Come, we'll pay you a little bit of money. Come sit in the room just to show face, and then let's see how it turns up. Of course, the HTS wants to consolidate its own power there, and it doesn't want to share this power with anyone, and that's the issue. But when we're talking about how, yes, to contend with Syria beyond Israel's red lines, there are other considerations also to take into account. Mr. Yisachar, what can you tell us about that?
Right. So first of all, great intro, Jonathan. And look, it's like any authoritarian regime who would like to have a posture or a veneer of people's regime. That's why it's called the People's Republic of Korea, the dictatorship of North Korea. Or Stalin's USSR had a main publication called Pravda, or Truth, ironically. So all these things are meant to portray a veneer of, some sort of a national unity. To me, it seems like he's trying to recreate perhaps President Macron's Le Grand Débat National, great national debate back in the time of the demonstrations in France, of course. Very different setting, needless to not to compare. Saying that Israel right now looks at the regime in Damascus in a more realpolitik kind of way, in a more pragmatic kind of way, and realizes that it is what it is, and it needs to deal with the current actors. Europe, as mentioned, is eager to sort of cash out the dividend of the revolution in Syria in order to bring back all the migrants. And the United States really is trying to play realpolitik in a way that conserves American interests. But Israel looks at that and says, it's very interesting. We identify an opportunity here. First of all, we are going to secure the buffer zone, because that was created in 1974 with the Hafez al-Assad regime. Right now, there is no Assad regime. It's a different system, not just an election for a different government, a different state system. Jonathan, I love this. Giving interviews to you is the one that I love most, but I give interviews to international channels, and they keep asking about the Israeli control of Syria. without ever mentioning the Turkish control of Syria. And that is very interesting because I thought international laws are, across the board. And apparently for Israel, there are personally customized laws, not international laws. And so the buffer zone in Syria right now, yes, Israel is eager not to allow any other October 7 like massacre to ever occur again. It's a strategic topographic area that Israel would like to preserve. And interestingly, what Netanyahu is saying right now, not only that Syria cannot send armed forces to South Syria, we are also interested in securing the future of the Druze community in Syria. There are reports of perhaps allowing some sort of work visas to Druze in southern Syria to come work in the Golan Heights, where usually Palestinians from the northern Syria go and work. All of these things are part of the package of reimagining the Middle East, recognizing a changed reality, recognizing that some things will not be as they used to be. And there is an opportunity here as well, not just a risk. There is also an opportunity for the fallen Assad regime that is part of the Shiite axis, the Iran axis. Now it's out of the way, and we have an opportunity to create coalitions, like-minded coalitions across the Middle East with Jewish people, with Christians, with Kurds, with people who are not, ardent Zionists, but are also pragmatic, and some minorities and populations we can work with.
Mr. Yisachar, Colonel Ben Shalom, thank you so very much for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel, and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.